With all of us turtle collectors spending hundreds if not thousands of dollars on the wonderful collector level TMNT toys from companies like NECA and Super 7, poor Playmates often kind of gets forgotten on the sideline. And rightfully so. A lot of what Playmates has been offering us has been not so great collector figures and re-releases of their classic figures. But recently Playmates has brought back some of their iconic vehicles, figures, and that wonderful artwork back to retail shelves for a fraction of the price of some of those collector turtle figures. So the question that I have is this resurgence of retro TMNT retro bliss or retro miss? We'll try to answer that question on this episode of Geek Dad Life. Hello everybody, welcome to Geek Dad Life. It's your host, Jay Gladfelter here. You could say that Playmates has been re-releasing their original turtle figures since 1989, because after that first 10-back set with those soft heads, they have re-released these figures again and again and again and again and again. They've all had varied approaches, some better than others, with my personal favorite being the 25th anniversary TMNT Turtle line. But for the majority of the 33 years since Turtles first hit toy shelves, Playmates has been the only game in town for us to get our TMNT fix. So if the style wasn't great or you didn't like the quality and approach to the figures that Playmates did, tough luck because they're the only game in town. But something has changed for turtle collectors in these past 5 years. Companies like NECA and Super 7 have made amazing collector level TMNT figures that represent versions of these characters that we've seen on movie screens, in the cartoons, as well as collector level versions of these iconic Playmates toys. And while it is a golden age for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle collectors, it's also really impacted our wallets because there has been so much amazing stuff. The expense of getting our TMNT fix just keeps rising and rising. Nowhere is that more true than the arrival of not one, not two, but 3 collector level TMNT party wagons that cost anywhere from $250 to nearly $500. So for us toy collectors, a lot of us might be priced out of, collecting TMNT toys. And that's where Playmates comes back into the picture. In the 32 years of re-releasing those iconic 10-back action figures from the first year of the TMNT toy line, it's really been nearly 30 years since they've leveraged that iconic brick motif pattern that was used on the earlier releases of the TMNT toys. So maybe Playmates was feeling the pressure from a lot of the amazing offerings from some of these other toy companies that are leveraging the TMNT license. And again, we don't need to dive too far into what Playmates has done for toy collectors. But in this past year or so, they have re-released the 4 original Turtles on the iconic classic 10-back versions of their card backs. And I gotta tell you, I was definitely burnt out on the re-releases of these same Turtles over and over and over again. But when I saw these figures for the first time on the toy pegs at my local Walmart, it was an instant buy. I don't know why. I just immediately bought it. And the thing is, you get the iconic packaging, but these figures are under $13 at retail, which again, if you look at the modern prices for toys, I think that's a really good buy. Because when you put this new release next to a vintage one, in this case, I got the new Michelangelo next to my vintage Softhead Fan Club insert version of that original 10-back figure. While it is different, the card back's a little bit smaller, but honestly, if you're putting this on a toy shelf, it's a lot cheaper to go for $13 versus, the hundreds of dollars this vintage one would cost. So for toy collectors, yes, this figure is not going to be as good as NECA's offerings or Super 7's offerings, and it's not even going to be as good as some of the previous re-releases and the original figures. You're still getting something that will look really nice on a wall or on a shelf. Something that also excited me about getting these figures is a new approach that they took to kind of recreating these vintage figures. They've said it's a rotocast head sculpt, which I think, in package at least, makes it look like more like a soft head turtle versus the many other re-releases of these figures that had hard plastic heads. Out of the package though, I think they are okay. The heads actually look a little bit bigger than any of the vintage or, more recent re-releases of the figures. I still think the 25th Turtles are the best looking ones out of all the re-releases. And again, if you compare them side by side to a vintage soft head turtle, you can see that the head is a little bit bigger. The vintage soft head is actually a soft head. These rotocast heads are still, a pretty hard plastic, even though I do like the matte appearance better than the re-release turtles. But it is different. It's not an exact recreation, which again, I'm fine with on any of these re-release. I actually prefer it to be slightly different from the vintage ones, just so it's easier to tell if you are a toy collector what's an original one versus a vintage one. They also feel a little bit gummier, but overall, it's still a pretty quality figure. For me personally, and my youngest son, Alex, has gotten into the turtles. So for me, getting these figures was a chance for him to have his own turtle toys to play with. And really, this is the same toys that I had growing up, and I think that's what makes this special. If you're a toy collector, I think you get a really nice one to put on a shelf in box. Outside of the box, I still think, if you're wanting to have a turtle collection that's much cheaper than diving into some of the higher end collector offerings, I still think you're getting something that'll look nice on a shelf with the turtle van or the blimp. Speaking of those vehicles, another special thing about this recent re-release of these toys is the inclusion of some vehicles. The first up is the Party Wagon. Now, this isn't the first time they've re-released this Party Wagon. Again, there's a really nice one in the 25th anniversary line, but it has been a while. So it's really cool that, on Walmart shelves, you can find that iconic box art for this Party Wagon on a shelf. So again, for a much cheaper price than a vintage sealed box version, or even just a loose with the box version of the Party Wagon, and significantly cheaper than NECA or Super 7 or UA's collector level version of the Party Wagon. For $35, you can get your own Party Wagon with that iconic artwork. But let's look at the actual wagon inside to see if it's better or worse than the vintage or some of the other re-releases. And the answer to that is they've improved some things compared to the vintage counterpart, but some things are actually worse. For the things they've improved, if you've, bought a vintage Party Wagon, you know that the actual kind of hinge spring mechanism for that pop-out side door is notorious for cracking. Whatever that orange plastic that they've used, and it's the same thing with the Turtle Blimp, it really dries out over time and with age. And give it a little, really any of them, they're going to break eventually. So the re-releases that they did, like the 25th Turtle Van, they kept that same mechanism, and it looks like they have improved this mechanism on this latest version of the Party Wagon. They also added a little tab to the top of the door that will connect it, hold it in place better than the original one did. It was never really a problem for me on the vintage one, but I guess that's an improvement in some form or fashion. They also cut out a little hole on the side of the door, so that way when you have the turtle sitting in that side door, it'll open up a little bit easier. I don't know if that was necessarily a problem on the vintage one, but again, I guess they're solving for that here with this little cutout on the top. The color of the stickers is slightly different. I don't necessarily think it's better or worse than the other ones. It's just different. So I'm not going to knock them for that. But getting to some of the things that I think are frustrating with this toy is really the visor. It is much flimsier than the vintage or some of the earlier re-releases of this van, and because of that flimsiness, it doesn't really attach very well to the van. It keeps falling off. My intention was to give this van to my youngest son, and I have, and he really digs it, but that visor keeps falling off. So I think that's a flaw. I don't know what they were going for there, but it's just not working. The side mirror and cannon and antenna attachments are about the same as the vintage one. They also fall off pretty easily, but the vintage one did as well, so I'm not going to ding this one for that. That's an original flaw from the vintage counterpart. But still, I think overall it looks good for $35. It's a really good value. And if you're a parent for a kid that is getting into turtles, I think you can't do any better than the original iconic TMNT Party Wagon. And last but not least is the Turtle Blimp, something that has not been re-released since the 90s, at least the vintage style one. But unfortunately, it's not quite a full vintage recreation of that classic Turtle Blimp that we grew up with as kids. Yes, it has the same kind of balloon and artwork that was used on the original version of the Turtle Blimp, but the actual wings and the actual glider is from the 2012 Turtle Blimp. And it's a bit of a bummer just for me wanting a kind of recreation of that vintage one. But for my kids, they really dug it. Actually, they didn't care that it wasn't like the other one. You know, I think for kids, they're going to love it, and it has the look of that vintage blimp, but it is a bummer that that glider is not the vintage glider. Maybe they lost the mold, so they had to use this one, but it's much cheaper than the vintage glider. There's no moving wheels. It's smaller. The rope mechanism that's part of it is kind of cool, I guess, but much rather would have the wacko bombs and stuff like that. So, you know, a bit of a bummer that the glider's not the same, but having that big, beautiful artwork on that inflatable blimp, and yes, it was fun having to blow up one of those blimps again. But, you know, it's hard to be upset. I think the price was right. You're at $35 again. It has that amazing artwork from the vintage one. So it was really cool to have that. And it's really cool to have a fresh blimp that's not leaking air that my kids can play with. So at the top of this video, I asked the question, is this retro TMNT line retro Bliss or a retro miss? And I think overall, I think it's retro Bliss. You know, I think seeing it on toy shelves, seeing that amazing artwork on toy shelves again was so awesome. And then getting to take it home and get to open these things up and kind of relive the experience of playing with these toys with my own young kids was awesome. So that's the lens that I'm looking at it through. But even for a collector, if you want a set of turtle figures and vehicles, you know, if you're looking at all four of these turtles, the Party Wagon and the Turtle Blimp, you're under $150 for everything. So if you want value, if you want an Insta Turtles collection for a reasonable price, look no further than Playmates offerings for their retro TMNT line that's available at Walmart right now. I'd like to thank the patrons that make this show possible. You can see a list of them right here. If you'd like to see your name, definitely become a patron today at patreon.com/geekdadlife. Check out some of my other videos like this one that YouTube wants you to check out and one of my more recent videos. And until next time, hasta luego and goodbye.